Hello everyone, I am Nayaswami Asha. We're continuing our study of the essence of self-realization. I always want to every so often show you what it really looks like. That's what it really looks like now. That's the modern version. Mine is the original, the 1990s original. You know, part of the differences here is this first, the book that I use was published before there was so much litigation about which pictures of Master could be used. And this was a big thing to use this picture here. But by the time we published this book, we had a lot more options. Actually, it's the same picture. It's just bigger. We were more confident by then because we'd been through the whole 12 years of litigation to free up the copyrights on a whole lot of these things. I talked all about that in the first class here, so I'm not going to reiterate it now. We are up to chapter 14 of 20 chapters. I was just curious. And we are now up to the need for a guru. I think it's interesting in the evolution of this book, as I've talked about it as we've progressed, he didn't start with the need for a guru, even though real spiritual life may start with the need for a guru. Because Swamiji beautifully, the way he orchestrated this book, he sort of led us through from point to point. The folly of materialism, the true purpose of life, the paths are many, but truth is one. What is karma? What about reincarnation? Just all these different steps. And the point of all those steps is really to help us to understand what it is we're trying to accomplish and then how we're going to accomplish it. It's very interesting, the first line of Autobiography of a Yogi, my convenient library here right behind me. The first line of Autobiography of a Yogi is about the characteristic features of Indian culture have long been a search for ultimate verities and the concomitant disciple-guru relationship. That's a fabulous sentence to contemplate. Master, of course, had a lot of time to think about what he wanted to be the first sentence of his autobiography. There's two factors there that are important. He refers to it not as the guru-disciple relationship, but as the disciple-guru relationship, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit when we talk about this chapter, is that it has to come first from the disciple, as Master says, really, just so perfectly here. Let's see, how does he say it? I think he says, it doesn't, you're not doing the guru any favor to become his disciple. It's not like he really needs us. I mean, it's sort of a funny way to put it. It's like we're just like, I consent to be your disciple, as if that was a big deal for him. It's really completely a big deal for us. And that's what Master is writing there, that the relationship has to be the disciple to the guru first. Because if the disciple isn't ready, there's nothing, absolutely nothing, that the guru can do for you. We'll trace that thought out a little more deeply. But the other part of that sentence, which is so amazing, is that it's the search for ultimate verities, which is that which is eternally true and which is the final explanation of this life experience that we're having, the ultimate truths that we're looking for. And when you start coming close to the ultimate truths, the parallel corollary of that, the absolute necessity, is the necessity for a guru. And whether we like it or not, that's what Master's book is about. It's one of the, when you think about his mission of self-realization, bringing these eternal truths from India to the West, and what is the nature of self-realization as he brought it, because he said it is not a new religion, it's a new expression. And it's a transition from Kali Yuga into Dwapara Yuga. So what are the characteristics of that new expression that he brought? In earlier of these sessions, I believe I've talked about energization exercises as being Master's individual and unique contribution to the science of yoga. That's something that he invented. But the characteristics of his particular mission of self-realization, you can pull out many of them, but one of the factors that he brought to the West is a true understanding of what it is to be a disciple, and really to the East also, And that's why so much of his book, it starts, the first sentence is about the guru, and then so much of the book is about his own search for a guru, then his training by Sri Yukteswar, Sri Yukteswar's relationship to Lahiri, Lahiri's relationship to Babaji. It's just spinning out this whole reality of how spiritual principles are transmitted and what it really means to be a disciple. So he starts here in this particular book by, in Swamiji, of course, these are the notes that Swami took on things Master said, but it's a conversation that Swamiji must have witnessed between Master and a guest, someone who wasn't really one of Master's disciples, but somebody that he shared time with. Swamiji said, Master, in Master's life, when you read about all the different things he did, he traveled back and forth across the United States for many years, just plowing the fields, stirring the waters, whatever you would call it, just going from city to city in the U.S., giving lectures in enormous lecture halls to thousands of people. It's really phenomenal to contemplate the way he approached his mission. There's letters that he wrote to Rajasi and to others during those years. It would be wonderful to have greater access to them. They're not readily available to the public. Dr. Lewis, there's a book of letters to Dr. Lewis, and I don't know where the Rajasi letters are right now. But Master just talked about his continuous just effort. And some of us receive on a daily basis, it's called This Day in History, On This Day in History. And it tells you, as far as it is known, it was a great deal of research that was done, as it happens, by John Parsons, who is Ananda's attorney, but also became very devoted to Master in the course of working with us on various litigation involving the freedom of his teachings for the world. As it happens, just incidentally, today is September 19th, the day that I'm recording this. This is the day that Master landed in Boston. We don't celebrate this day as any particular kind of an anniversary. We celebrate September 12th as the day that Swamiji became a disciple of Master, but today is the day that Master landed in America. And I think September 19th is the day we ought to start making note of. Pretty soon we'll have enough holidays that will become like the Indian calendar. It will always be a festival day of one kind or another related to our path. So, but part of what this, on this day in history, and I'm not exactly sure how you find this in order to subscribe to it, but I bet if you emailed Ananda online, they'll help you figure it out. But you find out all the different places Master was going. He was going to the Rotary clubs and the Lions clubs and the Elks club and the Women's club and the Pioneer Society of this and the Businessman's Association of that and the Artists Collective here and the Writers this and all kinds of topics. You know, India's approach to business, a super consciousness in art. Is the world going to end? That was one of his topics. Is this the end of the world? Because he was going through, from 1920 on, the Depression, the conflict in Europe, the world wars, all kinds of things he had to talk about. But the end point is, he spoke with many, many, many people. He wasn't, and he met governors, and he met government figures, and Supreme Court justices and presidents of the United States. He wasn't just living in some kind of isolation, talking only to devotees. So when he was living at Mount Washington, he often had guests. In fact, they said he had many, many guests, people who came to stay there, people who came to see him, acquaintances and friends left over from all these tours, people who heard about him, who wanted to know about him. And Swami Kriyananda, as I said at the first talk of this whole series, Master often had Swamiji serve meals when Master had guests, and then Swamiji would listen to the conversations and then write it all down. So this first one certainly seems to be a conversation between Master and someone who has interest but is not yet understanding what a disciple is. And she simply takes issue with the entire concept of a guru. You know, I am an adult person. Why would I need someone else to make my decisions for me? And she expresses the misunderstanding that so many people have, that somehow the guru is a free ride, that you surrender your own will to this Superman, and this Superman then makes everything happen for you, and you become like a child, like an obedient child in the face of this superior understanding, and instead of becoming stronger in yourself, you actually become weaker and weaker. In his autobiography, The Path, The New Path it's called now, Swami Kriyananda describes a conversation he had with his cousin or some family member. Swamiji tells the interesting story that when he found Autobiography of a Yogi, his father was already in Egypt, and he had just put his mother on the boat to go to Egypt. This was 1948. His father worked for Esso Oil Company. It was called Standard Oil then, and was a geologist and had been sent to Egypt to look for oil on what turned out to be, Swamiji said, a completely fruitless effort on the part of his father. Although, interestingly, his father knew where the oil was, but he couldn't persuade his company to follow his knowledge. So his father put out a great deal of work over a period of years. In the end, it folded up and nothing came of it. Another company came in, did exactly what Swami's father had recommended, and they found the oil that he knew was there. But the interesting point, and the reason I mention that, is Swamiji's, in those days, long-distance phone calls were very difficult to make, and people did not fly back and forth across the ocean. They went by ship. So when somebody was in Egypt and you were in the United States, it was very difficult to have communication. And his mother was not even in Egypt. She was on the boat crossing over the ocean. And he finds Autobiography of a Yogi. Within a week has left everything behind, has come to California, become Master's disciple. His parents don't even know where he is or what he's doing. What to speak of being able to exert any possibility of influencing him. Swamiji himself says, you know, he would like to think that his determination would have withstood his parents' undoubted opposition to what would have looked to them like absolute madness. But he said he wasn't put to the test. And he said later, the futility of his father's exercise in Egypt professionally made Swamiji even more, as he put it, suspicious of what the whole purpose of that Egypt venture was. It was just to get them completely out of his field of life. And it was 2 years before they had a whatever you call it, furlough to come to America and meet him, by which point Swamiji was completely dedicated to the path, and there was no chance at all. But in the middle of that, they sent some relative, as he put it, some distant relative of some sort who lived in Los Angeles to sort of just check out. They must have been frantic to see what was going on. And Swamiji himself said he didn't make it any easier on his parents because he was so enthusiastic about the teachings, you know, insofar as he did write to them, he was not judicious in what he said. I'm going to digress just a little. When one is very new on the path, one picks it up from very odd strings, sometimes, especially in terms of trying to persuade the uninvolved. When I was very early on the path, which I would have been 19, and I was so excited about it all, and for some reason the string that I picked it up from first was renouncing all desires, overcoming all desires. And so I was talking to a very worldly relative. I mean, there was just like, you know, if I'd had a molecule of intuition, I would have known this is not the person to talk to. But I'm so enthusiastic and lacking any molecules of intuition. My little speech was completely unconvincing. So I started in with, you know how it is when you really desire to have something and maybe you work for it and then you finally get it and then it just never turns out to fulfill you in the way that you like. And my relative was saying, yes, I know just what you mean. And then, you try, but it just, desires just never bring you what you want. Yes, I know what you mean, she said. And then she said, that's why it's so important to keep on wanting new things. And I was just like, oh dear, somehow or another we're not in sync. And as you can well imagine, my conversion attempts there did not succeed. Well, this is the relative who comes to Swamiji, who perfectly fine people, but not even slightly in tune with what Swamiji was doing. And she took great affront, the niece or cousin, whoever she was greatly affronted by the fact that they called him master. Why do you have to call him master? You have your own free will. And that's just exactly how people see it. You see a grown person, an adult person, even a person of accomplishment, calling someone else master, your first thought is that he must be taking advantage of it and that you must be weakened by that relationship. It's interesting when, at various times in the course of Ananda's history, we have been vilified. It's the nature of light to be vilified by the darkness. The first cycle of it was in the early 80s in a political effort we were making in the local county where we lived. And we were trying to incorporate our community as a California city so that we would have more freedom over planning and zoning. It's a very long and rather entertaining story, which I actually talk about. I have all these books today, which I talk about in this book, which is about stories of Swami Kriyananda, which even though I'm the author of this book, I still highly recommend it. It's stories of life with Swami. It's absolutely gorgeous. And one of them is the effort to incorporate as a California city. It's called Quick Change in there because the point of the story is different than the political effort. But in the process of that, we had tremendous opposition from the neighborhood for all kinds of crazy reasons, none of which had to do with the merits of the project. We eventually gave up because it just wasn't going to happen. But they just vilified Swami and just accused him of financial impropriety, personal impropriety, power-mongering, everything you could think of. And it came out again later when we were in litigation over the right to use Yogananda's teachings, over an effort, one group trying to monopolize his teachings and are trying to liberate them for the world. But Swami Kriyananda was again vilified, very, very viciously, personally. Financial impropriety, personal impropriety, power impropriety. And Swamiji said so interestingly, he said, the people who are accusing me, if they themselves had the opportunity that is presented to me as the leader of this community, they would take advantage of that opportunity in all the ways that they've accused me. And they can't prove that I have, but they conclude that that must mean because I'm so clever, I'm hiding it. Because they literally cannot imagine that given the opportunity, I wouldn't take it. Because that's where their consciousness is. If they had that kind of power, if they could control people in that way, if they could get people to do what they wanted, if they could get favors from people of all kinds because of their position, of course they would do it. They can't see a world that isn't like that. And so it is when we come into this relationship with the Guru, that those who don't understand why we're doing this, really they don't understand it. They're just incapable of understanding it. They don't understand how utterly and completely selfless the Guru's role is in our life. Nor do they understand how the level of perfect wisdom that an individual can have and how completely other that level of wisdom is from just merely being smart and well-educated. And this is what this worldly woman argues with Master. You know, I'm educated, I can make my own decisions, I'm an adult person. And Master tries to explain to her that you don't really understand the nature of self-realization. It's not merely polishing up the ego and getting more and more effective. We see people who can be very effective in the world. They run companies, they win prizes, they make scientific discoveries, they do artistic things. It's not like the human personality can't express itself in ways that are notable. I mean, these are notable achievements. But self-realization, as Master puts it, is just a world completely beyond what the human personality can even imagine. And to think that the human personality and the ego itself can liberate itself from itself, it's just not possible. And Master puts it so simply, in any serious undertaking that requires some subtlety of skill, a wise person always seeks out a teacher. You always try to find someone. You want to learn to play the piano. You find somebody who can help you. Nowadays, the concept of mentoring is very popular. You want to be a good businessman. You want to run an import-export business. You try to get somebody to mentor you in the field that you're trying to master. And the mentoring idea is just touching on the very hem of the garment of even the concept of a guru. But it's understood that it's not merely just the facts and figures of how this is done. It's the whole intuitive understanding that there's a vibratory exchange. That's why people who share interests often congregate together. And that's why often some of the greatest successes come when people of like mind. I mean, I'll think of the artistic renaissance in Florence, where you have people of exceptional ability who are not only doing what they're doing, but they're exchanging energy and they're exchanging magnetism. And their magnetism helps each other. And what we're working with when we're working with self-realization is we're trying to go into a reality that we simply can't access with the mind and with the ego and with the educated self. And as Master puts it quite simply, if you're lost in a forest and someone says, I know the way out, why would you not follow them? Would that be wisdom to say, no, I'd rather get out myself? No, of course not. You would say, yes, please show me the way. But you would still have to walk out yourself. Master puts it in a very beautiful way in here. He says, the guru can come and open the cage, which is the cage of our delusions, of our attachments, of our misunderstandings of where our happiness comes from. It's a very touching image. The guru can come and open the cage, but if we want to stay there and be comfortable with our attachments and just hold on to them, he can't make us come out. And nor would he. This whole idea that the guru will impose himself on us, when I would teach the beginning meditation classes, which I did some decades ago here in our Ananda Palo Alto colony, when we were first starting and everything was much smaller, including our teaching staff. I did a lot of all the classes myself. And I would introduce the idea of the guru because we would conduct our beginning meditation class in front of the altar of the masters, because that's what we do. Because it isn't just this mechanical technique, it's the relationship with the masters. So I'd have to explain it. And sometimes people would express that, I want my own independent will. And after a while, at first you defend or you try to dismantle, you try to explain like this. But I finally came to realize, this was my answer, no such luck. I mean, no such luck that you're just going to get this guru to just do it for you. Like, dream on, honey. There's no substitute for that, the necessity to find our own freedom. But what the guru simply tells you to do is how to do it. Because this is the most fascinating aspect of the guru, that it's just, for me lately, it's been one of those ideas. So I'm sure you've heard me say it, because it's just, I get on these little jags sometime in some particular idea. I hammer away at it until I feel like I've drunk from it everything I can. But the master is a self-realized being. And as Swami explained to his skeptical cousin, that we call him master not because he's master over us, but because he's master of himself. And that's where the point is. You're a maestro because you have mastered your craft, whether you're an artist or whatever you are. But a master in a spiritual sense means that the ego self has been transcended. As Yogananda put it in such beautiful words, I killed Yogananda long ago. He said, no one dwells in this temple now but God. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to become master of ourselves. And so the guru is someone who has literally walked the path that we have walked. And looking at us as a vibration of consciousness of a particular formula of enlightenment in delusion. You know, whether it's a 20-40 or a 40-20 or a 90-10 or whatever it is, it's like we have these certain vrittis swirling within us, this magnetic field of attachments and fears and longings and regrets and emotions and unresolved, it's quite a lot of stuff. And then on the other hand, we have this clarity of understanding of many things that we've turned our backs on and we're never going there again, because it's over. We've seen through those delusions. And one needs to remain humble because you never know. But at the same time, one can look at one's life and just see that there has been a certain progress made. There must be, in order to be at the point where one is willing to be a disciple and wanting to practice Kriya and interested in learning these teachings. It's very, very good karma from a long, long time in order to get to this point. I mean, just look around. In the path, again, Swami speaks of the cousin who came to speak to him, and she talked about why should I give up desires and all that sort of thing. What's wrong with wanting a new couch? Something like that. Swami laments. He said, I wished I could see great happiness in your eyes after you got that couch, but I didn't see it. What we're really looking for are true fulfillment. So the Master has walked exactly where we've walked. He's had to go through every iteration of delusion and understanding until all those delusions were overcome. And it's very complicated the way they hold us. And one of the questions, the delusions I mean, one of the questions that is raised in this chapter about the need for a guru is the objection that's often raised by people who are very devoted to the Bible, which is, of course, what Master met often in America, is that people who are fundamental Christians or Bible-based Christians who feel that the Bible is the Word of God and what do we need more than the Scripture? Master gives an extremely interesting answer. First of all, he says not all of Scripture comes from the same level of revelation. It was written down by people, and some of them had a greater understanding than others. And it takes realization even to know what parts of the Bible to listen to. But then he also says that Scriptures are a general teaching, and how it relates, which parts of it relate, and how an individual needs to apply those teachings is a different art than just being able to read the book. And he said also, if you misinterpret the Scripture, it can't correct you. But if you have an attunement with a Master, when you veer outside that attunement, then the Master himself can correct you. Or, of course, this is not in this chapter, but this has always been amusing to me in a kind of poignant way, which is the most guru-oriented religion in the world, virtually, is Christianity. It's all devoted to Jesus. And who is Jesus but the guru to those who follow him? And they might call it from the Bible, but what they're really striving for, and if they're true Christians, what they're really experiencing is attunement with their guru, who is Jesus Christ. And he's working with them just as directly and in exactly the same ways that Master does, that any guru does, if people will let him. Because the Master can open the cage, but if we cling, then we can't come out until we're ready to come out. Well, let's see. Master, let's just think what else. One of the most difficult things you see on the spiritual path that we have to work with, and Master touches it in here, but it's a subtlety, which is that, and he says here that the Guru doesn't come to us until we really long for the Guru. There's a magnetic attraction that we put out, and we might not even know that we're looking for a Guru. That might not be in our minds that that's what we're looking for, but there is a longing for transcendence. There's a longing to break free. In my own life, I met Swami Kriyananda when I was 22, and through him I found out about Yogananda and became devoted to Master in the way that I've lived my life ever since. But I wasn't thinking ever that I was looking for a guru. I can't ever remember even thinking about that concept. Even after I sort of got onto the spiritual path, it wasn't exactly like that. But I was longing for a certain kind of freedom. And what I understood is exactly what Master describes here. As Master puts it, if you're lost and someone offers to guide you out of wherever you're lost, it's wisdom to take that offer. And that's where I felt in my life, that I was lost, deeply lost. And nothing that anybody was offering me was in any way a reliable course out. And when I saw Swami Kriyananda, what I saw in him was someone who had made it to freedom, or at least had made it so much farther down the road to freedom than I had gone, that I knew he could lead me. Now, whether that comes when you meet a person, when you read a book, when you have an intuitive understanding, when you see a vision, whatever it might be, but there comes this point where you realize that somebody really knows something that you don't know. And what you have to understand about that is that doesn't in any way denigrate what you do know. And it doesn't in any way denigrate your own power to move your own life. But what it requires is the necessary humility to realize that despite everything I may be able to do. Because you have to have a certain amount of personal strength before it even occurs to you that self-realization is where I'm going. But you have to also have the humility to realize that I really don't know how to get there myself. And that's why in the first sentence of Autobiography of a Yogi, it goes disciple-guru. Because until the individual recognizes the need for guidance, then the guru can't help you. Because as you just want to argue with him, as Master said, there's a wonderful Greek myth which is so indicative of the spiritual path. And it's the myth of Theseus, who has to go into this labyrinth to slay the Minotaur. And it's possible to get into the labyrinth, but getting out of the labyrinth, everyone who tries gets lost and is never seen from again. And so the woman who loves him actually has a spool of thread, and he takes the end of the thread and he goes into the labyrinth and he slays the Minotaur, but then he can come out again because she's standing at the other end. And that's just a beautiful image of how it works between the disciple and the guru, that the guru is standing at the other end, and he holds, if you will, the thread of our life, really, and certainly the thread of our enlightenment. And he holds it, and we have to still go through all those bypaths, and our goal is, the thread is not physical, The thread is a certain vibration of consciousness that we attune ourselves to and wish to attune ourselves to. I just received an email as a comment on another video I had posted on the classes I've been giving on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And her comment was simply, it was convoluted, but this is what she said. When something disturbs my peace, and I could respond by restraining my emotional response, but I don't want to, and I don't remember to. I just jump into it, and I make this emotional chaos, and then afterwards I remember that maybe I didn't have to do that. Did you all follow that? I answered her very briefly in a very simple way, which is, you desire to learn the teachings, you learn the teachings. You find out what the techniques, you find out what the methods are. Then you forget to apply them. Because in the moment, delusion takes you over. And when you're in the midst of delusion, you forget the teachings, you forget the techniques, you forget the methods. You don't want to know them in that moment. The rush of that habit of anger, resentment, disappointment, despair, sadness, whatever the long list is of the particular vrittis that operate within us, and our energy's going in a certain direction, and those vrittis grab us. And we forget all the things that we could do to stay out of those vrittis. We just fall into them again. And then they prove to be the same old, and we don't like it so much. And we ask, why didn't I respond differently? Well, that is the spiritual path. Why didn't I respond differently? I must resolve to try again, and try again, and try again. And it doesn't matter how many times we fail. It matters only that we keep getting up, just like that. And where the Guru plays the part is, we form this internal connection. And when we have this discipleship relationship, and there's a further chapter called the disciples part, which may be the next chapter, the disciples part, is to hold that relationship and to cultivate when it's practice when it's easier, which is what Swamiji's advice to me was when I asked him a very complicated question about right action. His answer to me was, what you're asking is how to know in a moment of crisis what is God's will. And he said, you must practice when it's easier. You have to practice before the crisis comes. And so if we want to be disciples, we have to practice the presence of the Guru. When we meditate, we have to call on the Master. When we're doing our work, we have to keep his company. We need to do japa. We need to perhaps repeat mantra. We need to constantly be referring our realities to the vibrations of Master's teachings. This is the fundamental premise of why, once we find our path, we should immerse ourselves in that vibration and not create too much confusion with vibrations that are not supportive or compatible. Because what we're always trying to do is we're trying to hold that attunement. And it's a friend of mine whose husband died many years ago was talking to me about the fact that she feels his presence sometimes in her dreams. She says she rarely, or perhaps even never, sees him, but she feels his presence and she knows it's him. Now, if you live with someone for many years, they have a certain vibration. You feel their presence, you know it's him or her. And with the Guru, you have those moments where you feel his presence and you know it's him. And you can feel when you're in harmony with that presence and when you're not in harmony with it. And that's a practice. And that's one of the reasons why we are encouraged, once we find our spiritual path, as I say, to immerse ourselves in that vibration so it becomes very, very deeply familiar to us. So that when we're doing things that are taking us outside of that vibration, either by ignorance or weakness or rebelliousness, whatever it might be, that we can tell the difference between being in the vibration of Master's ray and being outside of it. I've never been a great fan of the Star Trek shows, although I like them, but the little bits and pieces of them, that there's the part where you go and you move from planet to planet by the transporter, and you stand in the beam, and then somehow your molecules are dematerialized and then rematerialized someplace else, and beam me up is the phrase that they use. But I love that picture because they have to go stand in a certain place, and this certain beam comes down, and when that beam comes down, their whole physical form can be altered. But they can't stand outside the beam. It can't happen unless they're standing inside the beam. So I often think that Master is constantly, and this is why Swamiji called it a ray, which is a very subtle thing to call it, this ray of Master's grace is always there. Just like Master said, it's no favor to the Guru to become his disciple, and he can't do anything for us unless we step into that ray. And that's how he guides us. He guides us from inside ourselves. But you see, if you don't want to listen, if you don't want to even train yourself to recognize it, or if you don't want to respond, that you just aren't interested. I prefer this vibration to the vibration of being in tune with the Master. The Master just simply continues to vibrate his ray, and the law of life itself becomes our teacher. The Master talked about a certain disciple at Mount Washington who Master tried very hard to keep with him, but the pull of worldliness was just too strong, and he was sucked away. And Master said, it's been many lifetimes. I mean, this hasn't happened to him for a long time, and now he's going to have to, the world is going to have to be his guru for a little more time. But he said he'll come back. He'll come back fairly soon, because he knows what it feels like to be in tune, and so he's not going to be satisfied, even though he's going to try to rebel against it for a while. Now, one aspect of this that we have to understand is that the process of the Master extricating us from all these different vrittis can't be accomplished in one incarnation. It's just not possible. There's just too much karma, and the project is too subtle. When Swamiji was a disciple of Master, one of the other monks there had a dream in which he saw himself as a disciple of Master on the island of Lemuria, which is, a true or mythical ancient civilization. I mean, thousands and thousands of years ago that would represent. And that this man was Master's disciple. And Swamiji was horrified. And he said to Master, have I been your disciple for thousands and thousands of years? And Master dodged the question and said only, well, it's been a long time. That's all I'll say. And Swamiji, again, horrified, said, does it always take so long? And Master said, oh, yes. He said, desire for this, for one thing or another, just takes you away again and again. I mean, just think about it. I'm of an age now where I've watched how decisions that you make when you're young can keep you preoccupied for decades. You become attracted to a person who has worldly ambitions. You become flattered by someone and marry someone whose life goals are really different than yours. You have children, you have to raise those children. You become financially dependent. You grow older, you lose your health. A whole incarnation just goes by. You start out with youthful spiritual ambitions, and they're just eaten up. And a whole incarnation goes by, one after another. One slip, one wrong choice, one restless decision. So Master tells this absolutely terrifying story about one of the nuns who was at Mount Washington. And she left the ashram in order to get married. Not that marriage per se is necessarily antithetical to the spiritual path, but this renunciate left the renunciate's life to get married. And Master said, if she had held out against that desire for just 24 more hours, she would never have had to deal with it again. Boy, is that an incentive to hold out for just 24 more hours, whatever the desire may be. Of course, we can't torture ourselves with the decisions we've made. When I myself made certain decisions that I wasn't sure whether they really were the right ones or not, and I wanted Swami to reassure me, he said, "Oh, it's just a thing, Asha. It doesn't. Nothing in itself is really decisive. What's decisive is what you do with your consciousness. If you find yourself in circumstances that are less congenial, then it's a greater challenge to your consciousness. But the circumstances are neutral. It's what you do with your consciousness afterwards as to whether or not it's spiritually beneficial or spiritually not. But this relationship with the Guru is formed over a long time. And don't think that just because you've taken a discipleship vow and you've committed yourself to this, that it's a done deal. People wander away from their gurus all the time. Master says it right here about a disciple who turned against him, who had rejected Yogananda. And he said, he will never attain freedom except through this channel, which is sent to him by God. And so the disciple was there, but he turned his back on his guru because he wasn't attentive to the necessity to be in tune. He wasn't conscious of the central importance of this, because the Guru guides you individually through that labyrinth of our own karmic and mental tendencies. Now, an interesting factor about this, because people often say, well, I want a living Guru. And this is an objection they have sometime to becoming a disciple of Master. And there's a beautiful story told that when a disciple was speaking to Brother Turiyananda, who is a very dynamic monk at Mount Washington, or at SRF. He lived actually at the Lake Shrine. Very lively, very wonderful man. He left his body rather early. He didn't live to be a ripe old age. Supposedly someone said to him, I say supposedly because it's just reported to me, supposedly someone said to him that he didn't want to be Master's disciple because he needed a living Guru. And Turiyananda said very simply, oh, Master is living, it's you who are dead. Just like that. Now, there's two factors here that are very important, and Master doesn't deal with it as much in here as Swami Kriyananda deals with it. Because he said, Master said there must be a living link. And it's interesting that even when Master was in the body, he commissioned Swami Kriyananda, among others, to initiate disciples on Master's behalf, which is through the disciple the Master can reach you. So the thought that people have that I need active involvement in my spiritual life is absolutely true, and that I need, clear feedback from individuals that I can't just make it up. I mean, there's the danger if you're all by yourself trying to be in tune that, again, you're not always certain whether or not you're reading the inner reality correctly. And if you deeply long for more, that feeling in you, that's not weakness, that's strength. That's the humility to recognize that I really can't do this myself. And so we need Guru Bhais, we need brothers and sisters on the spiritual path, and we need people who have more experience than us. If we accept the fact that there's a progression towards self-realization, that means that there's going to be people who've been on this trail longer than we have. And they might not themselves know the way all the way to the top, but they can certainly show us our own next steps. There's absolutely no question about that. They know more than we do. And nowadays, I mean, it's just fantastic with all this technology. Even here, this very conversation that we're having is through the medium of all this technology. And I'm talking in the moment to some of you, and I will be talking in the future to many, many more of you all over the planet. And I'm telling you what Swamiji told me, and Swamiji told us what Master told him. And there's a working together to understand these teachings and a vibratory connection that is now created with online communities where people in real time can talk to each other and discuss these issues, because there has to be living links. That's right, there has to be living links. People who know the teachings, and even more powerfully, advanced disciples who can act as instruments of Master himself, which is what Swami Kriyananda has always done for us. He was our living link to Master. And toward the end of his life, he said that more clearly. It was always true, but he was more willing to say it. You know, most of you come to Master through me. I'm your living link. And because here's the other part of that. And this is a part that people don't think of this clearly. You see, how often will Master incarnate? How often will Jesus Christ incarnate, or Krishna? I mean, you have these great gurus, Sri Ramakrishna, many of these great gurus who are avatars. They come only every once in a while. Master said he would come 200 years from that incarnation. 200 years later, he said he would incarnate. He said he would live in the Himalayas and he would draw a small band of disciples to him. That it would be a secluded lifetime as a balance against the very public one that he lived. How many of us are going to be in that small band of disciples? I don't know. The point, though, is that I'll just speak for myself, I need a lot more incarnations. I would like to be liberated, and I would like to be liberated soon. But I recognize the likelihood of needing to live through a few more lifetimes. The average devotee, even if very sincere, your last incarnation looks a lot like Swami Kriyananda, at least in your own heart. I do believe that I know free souls that I can't imagine people being more spiritually advanced. But nonetheless, as we progress on the spiritual path, it takes many incarnations. And it just stands to reason that Paramhansa Yogananda, that soul, is not going to be there in the body in every one of those incarnations, because we just need too many. But it is true that his living spirit, either in our hearts through his writings and through those who are in tune with him, advanced disciples, Guru Bhais, fellow travelers on the path, that his living spirit will come to us. And if we constantly say, oh, I need someone in the body, then we never forge a lasting alliance. Because we reject this one, we reject that one, we reject this one. We go find somebody in the body, and then the next incarnation, if he's not there, we go find someone else. I mean, the process is so much more subtle than that, and requires so much more sensitive attunement. It's something very, very real to contemplate. You know, the Master's consciousness is profoundly accessible, but we have to lift ourselves to it. And that's the disciple's part. I mean, our next session is the disciple's part, and we'll talk about it much more deeply. But we reject so many people who had the karma to be there with Master didn't stay. That's a fascinating fact. We all imagine that if we had had the karma, we would have just stayed there. It was not easy to be his disciple, for one thing. He knew every single thought that you were thinking. And his Master said, even if the Guru's discipline appears to be harsh, it's just exactly what the disciple needs. Master talked about how Sri Yukteswar was with him, and Swamiji just talked about the sort of unrelenting nature of the discipline, that we just have to constantly, it's a matter of life or death. And we succeed better and worse on different days, but underneath it there just has to be this commitment that there is no other fulfillment possible. And even if I resist the heroic self-offering that true self-realization requires, that doesn't mean I abandon the path, ever. Where could I go?
St. Peter's beautiful words to Jesus when so many disciples were leaving him. Jesus asked Peter, "Are you going to leave me too?" You can just feel the extraordinary intensity of that moment. The Guru is just looking right at his disciple. What are you going to do? And the disciple says, "Where could I go? There is no other reality now except my relationship with you." Master would often say to Rajasi, who was his most advanced male disciple, "Don't forget where your power comes from." And Rajasi would say, "Yes, Master, I know it comes from you." And here was Rajasi, he was a self-made millionaire. I mean, he was a huge man in the world in which he lived outside of the ashram. He was recognized in so many ways. But then when he came to his guru, he was just like a little boy. "I know, Master, my power comes from you." I remember once traveling with Swami Kriyananda. Another woman and I were with him. We were in Hawaii, as it happened. He was editing part 1 of The New Path. So this was in the late 70s. And he was working very hard on this, and we were typing the manuscript and cooking meals, so that he could just be entirely focused. We were taking care of the household and being secretarial, so he could put all his energy into it. And we needed a break. So we decided, we saw in the tourist thing that there was a boat ride. So we wanted to take a boat ride. And I called up for the tickets, and she said to me, "How many adults, how many children?" I was 30 probably at the time, and so was my friend. And I said 1 adult, and I was about to say, "and 2 children." And then I realized when this man showed up with 2 grown women, they were not going to give us children's tickets. But so I pretended, and I said 3 adults. But really, it was 1 adult and 2 children. There was just no way around it. Because compared to, and Master says this in here, and before God we're all children, and before the Guru we're all children. And that's part of what made Rajasi's relationship to Master so touching, was the accomplishments of the man, and the confidence and the power that he had. But before his Guru, he was just a child. There was no reason to be anything else. And this Master has this to a certain disciple. Yogananda once said, "I lost touch with you for a few incarnations, but I will never lose touch with you again." Swamiji said that was Senor Cuaron, who was a man from Mexico. And he said Mr. Cuaron was a big man, also a successful man in his own right. And he would often remind Master of this. "Master," he would say, Mr. Senor Cuaron would say, "you remember your promise?" And Master would say, "Yes, I remember. I promise. I will never lose track of you again." I mean, just think how Cuaron himself must have felt. Whatever it was that confused him and took him outside of the Guru's aura, whatever those incarnations must have been like for him, even if we don't consciously remember, those experiences form the emotional fabric of our life. And so his Cuaron's relationship to Master must have been, extra poignant for him, because he was re-embracing what for a time he had lost. How if your child wanders away from you, you're so happy. If you lose touch with a friend, if you accidentally hurt a relationship and then restore it again, you have this extra sensitivity to it. There's so much sweetness in there. Let me just find a few more things here. Master, the last statement Master makes is he's saying those who are connected to this work are not just connected to some printing press, but to a line of God-realized masters. God himself, through them, overshadows this work and all who follow it sincerely with devotion will be brought to him. That very statement of Master, alas, has been greatly distorted to make it seem as if that were some kind of an external connection with the form or the organization. But the truth of the matter is, your religion is the garment of light you wear around your heart, and nothing else matters but that. All right. God bless you, everyone.